Welcome in. You're listening to Locked On Now NHL, local experts weighing in on the biggest stories on the ice. I'm your host, Kainani Stevens. Thank you for making Locked On Now your first listen every single weekday. We've got our Locked On NHL hosts here to recap the playoff action from Sunday around the NHL. And the Blues beat the Wild and tied their series in last night's biggest game.
The biggest game.
The Wild certainly had their chance on Sunday to take a controlling 3-1 lead on the Blues, but instead St. Louis won at home, and that series also now sits tied at 2 games apiece. Locked On Blues tells us how St. Louis pulled away from Minnesota late.
All right, the St. Louis Blues had a huge 5-2 victory against the Minnesota Wild in Game 4 to even up the series at 2 games apiece. Jordan Binnington got the start, but it was all about the offense as the Blues scored 5 goals, getting back to their former ways of dominating offensively. Jordan Kyrou had himself 2 goals, including a beautiful self-created goal off of a nice between-the-legs move. David Perron had himself a great night. Ryan O'Reilly had himself a great night with parents in attendance. Love when they kept flashing the camera to his parents in the crowd. Good stuff there. Like I said, Binnington was solid. Definitely a flurry there from Minnesota in that third period. The Blues and Binnington did a very good job of stifling. But it was all about the offense. It was very refreshing to see the Blues offense getting back on track and putting up 5 goals. You know, obviously one of them was an empty netter, but still, very inspiring stuff there, very encouraging stuff. Looking forward to Game 5. It's going to be a big one.
Now the Wild just need to win at home to move on, but also need to make some fixes after last night's loss. Locked On Wild knows how Minnesota learns from Game 4 mistakes.
Stop David Perron, win. Don't stop David Perron, lose. Hey everybody, Seth Topol, host of Locked On Wild, your daily Minnesota Wild podcast, recapping a 5-2 loss in Game 4 of the series between the Wild and the Blues, which tied the series at 2 games apiece and sends us to the XL Energy Center Tuesday night for Game 5. Wild were slow out of the gate as the Blues dominated play through the early part of the game. Took a 1-0 lead. The Wild did get the answer to send things to the first intermission at 1 apiece. The Blues scored twice in the second period in the span of 54 seconds, and the Wild were playing catch-up every step of the way after that. Wild did get a Matt Boldy goal to make it 3-2, but that was as close as the Wild would get as the Blues added an empty netter and a power play goal with time winding down to seal the win. And for the Blues, they played like a team that was desperate to try to even things up, and the Wild just not able to match that intensity here in this game. We also saw a rough go for the Grief line and some encouragement, maybe seeing the Fiala line start to pick up their play a little bit. But all in all, the Wild do get home field ice back in their favor by winning one of the 2 games in St. Louis. So we head back to the X, tied up at 2-2, and the Wild will hope to take a 3-2 lead by winning Game 5. For more on Game 4, as well as the rest of the series, make sure you follow Locked On Wild wherever you listen to podcasts.
Injuries had Locked On Bruins pessimistic going into Game 4 against the Hurricanes, but Boston pulled out the win at home, and they head back to Carolina with the series tied at 2. Locked On Bruins recaps the action.
I'm going to be completely honest, Bruins fans. I was not expecting the black and gold to come on top of Game 4 without Charlie McAvoy and Hampus Lindholm, but that's exactly what they did in a gutsy effort against the Carolina Hurricanes in Game 4. This is Ian McLaren, host of Locked On Boston Bruins, and with Lindholm out with an upper body injury, suffered earlier in the series, and Charlie McAvoy placed in COVID-19 protocol prior to Game 4, the undermanned Boston Bruins stepped up in a huge way, defeating the Carolina Hurricanes by a score of 5-2. It was Brad Marchand who stepped up big time in this one, and just an incredible effort for the Boston Bruins, who almost experienced an injury to Patrice Bergeron as well after he was cut by his eye near the end of the second period. Brad Marchand, 2 goals, 3 assists, 5 points. He was in on every goal. And the Bruins now head to Carolina with the series tied at 2. And it's now a best out of 3. Catch all the latest on the Boston Bruins on the Locked On Bruins podcast, hosted by me, Ian McLaren.
The LA Kings scored a pair of goals in the first period and took that lead all the way until the end against the Oilers. Locked On Kings tells you how LA evened the series with Edmonton at home.
After 2 embarrassing losses to the Oilers, the Los Angeles Kings were just about in must-win territory. Todd McLellan tweaked this lineup, removing Andreas Athanasiou and Jordan Spence, putting in Troy Stretcher and Carl Grundstrom instead, and both players rewarded McLellan for that move. On Sunday night, the Kings turned in a gutsy performance at home, winning Game 4 of their series 4-0. It's the team's first home playoff win since June 13th, 2014, when they captured their last Stanley Cup. Jonathan Quick stopped all 31 shots he faced for his 10th playoff shutout, tying him with Henrik Lundqvist and Ken Dryden for 10th all-time in league history. The team got goals from Trevor Moore, Troy Stetcher, and 2 third-period goals from Carl Grundstrom, the Swedish power forward who sat out Game 3 with a minor injury, but stepped in tonight and looked fantastic, making some hard-nosed plays for the net. The game got feisty at the end with Evander Kane, Cody Ceci, Darnell Nurse, Alex Edler, Trevor Moore, and Blake Lizotte all receiving 10-minute misconduct penalties in the final 5 minutes of play, which means things are going to get a little weird for Game 5. The gutsy physical win sets the stage for Game 5 back in Edmonton on Tuesday. To keep up with the action, make sure you're following Locked On Kings on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts.
The Oilers fell behind early and could never really catch up against the Kings. Locked On Oilers goes over the fixes for Edmonton as it comes back home for Game 5.
The Edmonton Oilers allowed the LA Kings to get right back into the series as the Edmonton Oilers lose 4-0 in Los Angeles in Game 4 as the LA Kings score twice in the first, twice in the third to put it away. Evander Kane, Darnell Nurse, and Cody Ceci all getting game misconducts. This is the first time the Oilers have been shut out since Jay Woodcroft took over behind the bench on February 10th. On Tuesday, the Oilers and the Kings will get right back at it for Game 5 in Edmonton for an 8 o'clock puck drop as the Oilers and the Kings are promised at least 6 with a 4-0 win for the LA Kings in Game 4.
That's all for today on Locked On Now NHL. Thank you for making Locked On Now your first listen every single weekday. Make sure you keep an eye on Locked On NHL and your team's Locked On podcast during these playoff series. I'm Kainani Stevens. This has been Locked On Now.